Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Grace of a Military Child in Life podcast. Military families are not like your traditional family. They are strong, brave, resilient, and some of the most incredible people I know. My name is Gracie, a U.S. Army brat, and I am your host. I am honored to be able to give military family members like myself a place for them to share their stories and experiences in the military life. Stay tuned for this week's guest. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to a new episode of Grace of a Military Child in Life. Today, I'm here with Sky, who is a military child turned military spouse. So, Sky, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Hi, good. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you. So, kind of give us an overview of your life, and how it relates to the military, being a military child and now a military spouse.
Yeah, I've been a military child since I was born. My dad was in active duty service when I was born, and he recently was discharged in 2016. And then in 2018, I got married to my husband, who is also in Army active duty, and he is now celebrating, I believe, his 9th year.
Wow, that's awesome. Do you how did those experiences how did they form your life?
I would definitely say that growing up as a military child, I had a very different perspective, and you have to grow a little bit emotionally a lot faster than most kids. For the first about 5-6 years of my life, I was actually raised by my grandparents. So I didn't live on a military base or anything like that. I actually lived overseas. I lived in Mexico with them. And then I came back to the US when around 5 or 6. And then my dad got orders to go overseas to Germany. So that was kind of my first real experience that I had with my parents. It was really just tossed into the life overseas, learning 2 different new languages and just really learning how to navigate different cultures, whether it be military culture and German culture, and obviously just as a whole American culture.
Yeah, especially not having lived with your parents for, the first little bit of your life. It's, definitely getting used to so much, especially as such a young child, because you're still learning, like you said, so many different cultures. And then you've got languages on top of that. And, everyone says it's easier to learn a language the younger you are, but it still is difficult nonetheless. So you're really got all of these things kind of stacked upon you and moving to so many different countries on top of that.
Yeah, it got a little overwhelming, but honestly, I'm really grateful for the experience because I had some experiences as a kid that some people will never have in their lifetime. Like I got to travel to so many different countries and learn so many different cultures and get a better understanding also of military history. There's so much military history in Europe.
Yeah.
And I think that helped shape a part of my life, and seeing the way that things that the United States did in Europe still echo to this day made me very aware of the choices that the military makes, and also just broaden my perspective in regards to that of what I wanted to do with my life. If I wanted to keep doing this, I was very I am not going to marry somebody in the military for a very, very long time. And ironically, my husband is a childhood friend that I have. So no one would have ever thought in a million years that he was going to join the military. It was just something that happened. And he didn't even have a relationship or anything like that with my dad. He made his own choice that kind of led him there. And when we met again, when we were older, we were like, well, we liked each other for each other, not necessarily because he was in the military or because whatever.
Yeah.
So that's kind of it's very weird how a lot of my childhood has bled into my adulthood.
Yeah. And that's, I think a lot of military kids echo that same or a very similar message. You'll get polar opposites of the people who are like, oh, I want to join the military or I want to marry military, very decided on that factor. But then you get a lot of people, and even myself included, where I was like, I'm never going to marry military. I'm never going to join the military. And sure, the idea to join the military played in the back of my head a couple times. But then I was like, I'm never going to do this. I'm never going to do this. It's just, that's a life that you don't necessarily expect that you would want for yourself, especially having lived it. And then you go through life and life works in a mysterious way. And somehow you find yourself back in that military community. And I think for military kids a lot, it's a sense of security because you're so used to it growing up that you just kind of are attracted right back to it, whether that's marrying into the military again or joining yourself.
Yeah, even after I got married, I was very tempted to join myself. I had started going through my enlistment process, and then I was in a car accident in 2019. Mm-hmm. And that set me back by a lot. And it was very stressful. I had suddenly decided this thing that I ran away from for so long that I wanted to be a part of it. And now for it to be like, well, now you don't have that option versus like you had that option when you were younger. It was kind of like a rude awakening. And I had looked at other avenues, whether it be commissioning or everything else. But the car accident just had affected me so badly that I needed to give my body time to heal before even looking at the idea of going back into the military. And then obviously aspects of my married life bled into it. And I had a baby and there were so many different things going on. And so I'm still at the age that if I wanted that to be an option, it's still there, but it would take a lot of hard work, dedication. I would have to be absolutely positive and sure that it would be my end goal would to either be enlist or commission.
Yeah. And especially now being a mom, you have kids and, you've built a life around being a military spouse. And so it's a hard transition to go from that, like you are now to saying, okay, in a sense, you have to drop everything to go to basic training or officer candidacy school, looking at the commissioning route, because you don't have access to the outside world and basic training or those types of schools for, I'm looking at basic training. I've got 10 weeks where I'm not going to have connection to the outside world. And then OCS is 12 weeks, no connection to the outside world there. So you have to be really certain before you even make that commitment to have to drop everything that to make this huge life decision and serve the country. And it's a hard decision, especially the older you get, 17, 18 years old. It's easy to say, okay, I have nothing going for me. I have no family yet. You have your mom, your dad, your siblings and everything, but you don't have a family that you've built yet. And so once you have all of that, once you have a degree or jobs, it really becomes hard to make that decision. And you really do have to be certain in it.
Yeah, there was a lot that went into it also. My dad is also one of the 9/11 first responders for the Pentagon. So there was that aspect that leaned into it too, where my family has a lot of 9/11 trauma, so to say, in that regards. So there's always this underlying sense of responsibility to joining the military that comes with it. My brother wants to go to West Point, and that is his end goal. That just, now that my husband is in the military and my family is so close and everything, that just seems like the Army has just consumed our lives. And while I'm not able to right now give my time to serve, I am trying to serve my community in other ways. I am part of the Spouses Club of Lewis McChord. I decided that I was going to go and compete in a pageant, and I fought to make sure that my title was that representing the base, because I was this is my home, this is my community. And I wanted those people to be able to have a voice and be able to communicate their concerns about housing, about pay, about all these things that kind of tend to get a little swept under the rug. And the work that is both done with Spouses Club and with Mrs. JBLM kind of comes together. And then, like you said, it all comes together with childhood experiences and the way that my family is just so military oriented.
Yeah. And I think that, hits it spot on, because you don't necessarily, I think it is a misconception some days that you don't necessarily have to be in the military, active duty or reserve, to serve. The family is serve on the front line or on the home front. We don't serve on the front lines, obviously, because we're not over there going on the deployments, going through the trainings, but the spouses and kids go through a lot too. And it's not an easy lifestyle we live. We're forced to move I mean, not forced to, like some people choose to stay behind, but we move with our service member. We travel the world. We, leave our life behind in a previous duty station to go fulfill, what the needs of the military are. And in our case, that is supporting your service member so they feel supported and they want to continue doing their job and continue serving the country. So, like, our jobs at home are equally important, and you don't have to be on those front lines to feel like you're doing something and have that sense of accomplishment. Like, you can do enough at home, being in the spouses clubs, being connected within your community and supporting those who are doing the work.
Yeah, that was a big mission that we had this year, was in regards to being community based. And obviously a lot of people know that spouses clubs are very deeply rooted in tradition, and it was a lot of luncheons, and it starts off as an officers club and then eventually it's an enlisted club, and it just like then some of them merge together, and by now almost all of them have merged together, and the rank structure doesn't matter anymore for people to be a part of it. However, for the longest time it's always been fundraising and luncheons, and there really has been, at least for JBLM, a lack of getting your hands dirty in the community and like putting physical labor into it. So that's been the mission for this 2024-2025 year, is to really work with our community partners, people that we raise money to give the grants to, so that we're present for them, where they're volunteering for them. We're putting on events that are community based and for the community, so that we can all come together. And there might be that spouse or that child that's like, hey, like my dad's gone, or my husband or my spouse, they just joined and I have no idea what I'm doing, or I just got here and I have no family around for miles and I'm so confused. So that's kind of, we're just trying to like step in and make sure that we're an additional resource and we're able to create that sense of community for everybody. Exactly how you were saying, these people just are uprooted and move their whole lives.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely important, because especially for those newer spouses, like as a child, you grow up with it. You're used to the moving around. You get really immersed in it really quickly. Especially, if your parent serves from birth, really, or from, an infant, toddler, when you start to finally get those memories, military life is all you remember. You remember the moving, you remember the leaving your friends, saying goodbye, saying hello, meeting new friends, trying to fit in a new place. But then as a spouse, and especially someone who spent their entire life in the civilian world, not moving around, not having to make new friends and leave a life behind, when they first get into that military life and the role of the military spouse, they don't really know what to expect. And, everyone says you know what you signed up for. And it's like, no, you don't, because everyone's life is so different. The way they react, the emotions that come with it. Some people find it easier to move and some people find it harder. And so things like spouses clubs and all of these community organizations and all of the other spouses and kids just living the lifestyle make it more important, because you know what it is. You have that firsthand experience that you can share with other people who are going through the lifestyle, who are coming into it, who are even on the way out is hard, the transitioning out of the military life, because it's a community that you're leaving behind. And sure, you experience the things of moving and having to leave an old life behind. But when you leave the military community and you start that separation process, whether your time is up or you are retiring, it is leaving literally a whole life, a whole community behind. And that can feel really isolating too.
Yeah, that's a big conversation I've had with my husband, is where we've decided like together, hey, what's going to happen in the future? And we both kind of, anytime we're faced with the idea of having to separate from the military community, it's a big stressor, because it's all he's known for his adult life. And it's been a big part of my life.
Right. Yeah. And when you have that big part of your life, and especially for you growing up in it and then, transitioning into the role of a spouse, that is really all you know. And then having to come into a new life, and especially as an adult, and with the military, you can retire so young. 38 years old is still young enough where you can go and have a whole other career on top of it. So you don't always know how you're going to react to that, what that is going to mean for you. And coming out of it, it's a more challenging thing than integrating into the lifestyle. Because once you're in it, once you're experiencing it and going through it, it is easier to adapt to it and integrate into that lifestyle. But then when you integrate back into the civilian world, it's hard, and it's a challenge that not everyone, is equipped to go through.
Yeah, we have an amazing retiree liaison, and she's come and she's told us like stories. The other thing for us is we've really tried to make it a focus that we want to start working with Gold Star families, because we felt that when it comes to Gold Star families, the way that they are essentially pushed out of the community and seen kind of this Grim Reaper-esque type of stigma that gets put on them, where it's like, hey, you were part of us for so long, but now due to an unfortunate situation, you can't sit with us anymore. And that shouldn't be the case, because they are equally still part of this family, and they're equally still going through it. Like, they are the equivalent of stuck in limbo. Like, they got stuck because of situations out of their control.
Yeah.
Like, one aspect, the military is always going to haunt their life, because that was the last place. That was the place where they were when their life changed drastically. And on the other hand, like, they're free to have a life in the civilian world, but you always have that. And I noticed, like, Gold Star families always tend to get called back for events and stuff like that, when there's good photo ops and whatnot. And so that was our mission. And that's the thing that I vocalized, where I was like, I want to make sure that these families feel welcome all of the time, not just when it's convenient because it makes a command look good, or it makes an installation look good, or it makes an organization look good. Like, no, like, all of the time, let's remind them that we are still there for them, that they don't have to feel, if they still want to be a part of this community, they're welcome to be a part of it. And we're going to embrace them with open arms.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned that, because I have met so many Gold Star children, with the situations that we've been dealt of my dad's injuries. We, being a Silver Star family, we get really integrated with the Gold Star families, during some instances too. And that is one struggle that I hear echoed through the Gold Star families. Most of the time they don't want the photo ops. They make them feel uncomfortable, because it's not, a lot of them feel that it's not a sacrifice that they made. It's a sacrifice that their parent made. And in turn, they're dealing with the repercussions of it. They're hurting. They feel like they're not as accepted. And that's, because of their parents' sacrifice, and their parents paid the ultimate sacrifice. It translates straight and directly to the spouses too. But those photo ops do more harm than they do good sometimes, because you don't want to feel like you are in the spotlight. You didn't do anything, to necessarily get in that spotlight. You didn't want to be in that spotlight in the first place. We see all of these Gold Star families out there, and we always think it's not going to be us. It's not going to be us. And when it is you, it's that reality check of, okay, well, this is us now. And you don't necessarily want all of the attention on you. And, there's so many organizations out there that do so many amazing things. But it takes somebody knowing exactly what you're going through to understand, okay, this is how I can best support these Gold Star families, these people who have gone through and faced the ultimate sacrifice of a service member.
Yeah. And I always say, like, I am blessed enough. I am lucky enough that my dad made it home through all his deployments. I was able to not have to experience those things. And I can't imagine the place I would be in if I did end up having experienced that. And like, my husband is he's deployed, and it's a different, obviously different MOSs. My dad was in a combat MOS. My husband is not. So there's two different types of stressors. But at the end of the day, deployment is still stressful, and there is still that idea in the back of your mind, exactly what you were saying. Like someone's always like, it's not going to be us. It's not going to be us. And then when it is you're just kind of like stuck. And that's what I've noticed. And so that was the big thing where it came to like memorials, funerals, anything like that. We want to make sure that we're trying to create a space within Operation Deploy or Dress that these families can come get the things that they need, and they can like basically have a private space to grieve, like you said, without the photo ops, without anything like that, get all the things they need completely free for their hygiene needs, for whatever they need to wear for funeral wear or for memorials or anything else that they may need. And we also want to keep that going beyond just, okay, your spouse just died. We're moving on now. Now we want to make sure that, okay, you're going to get remarried or you're going to move on with your life. You could still come and get a wedding dress from us. Is your child going to prom? They can still come and get a suit or whatever from us. Are you having a major life event that you need formal wear for or work wear for? You can still come to us. Like we are still here for you. And I think it also does come from that sense of like, my dad doesn't have any of these. He's not Silver Star, he doesn't have Gold Star or anything like that because he was just blessed enough to be able to come home safely. He was going to have a Purple Heart, but my dad decided to turn it down because he didn't want to extend his deployment contract. And that's literally the joke that we have in our family where we're just like, we cannot believe you would turn down a Purple Heart.
Yeah.
But he's like, I feel like there's people who need it more. And that's the kind of person that my dad is, where he's like, I feel like my injury wasn't severe enough. And he's like, I can still go on with my life and have a career in government service still, where there is people who are Purple Heart recipients that they are severely injured and they can't have a career anymore. Like that is their whole life was taken from them due to an injury. And he's like, I can still keep going. I'm still blessed enough to be able to keep having a life and having a career. And so he's like, I don't like to take that from people. And I think that sense of like selflessness for my dad also like helping me kind of realize that there might be a lot of people out there that, although they might not necessarily have the label on it or the award for it, it doesn't mean that they still didn't do something worthwhile celebrating, or they didn't have that self-sacrifice, or they don't have injuries or invisible injuries.
Right. And you think of, the Army and the Army values and what are instilled in these soldiers from the very first day. And selfless service is one of them. And that's why, growing up and going through my dad's injuries, and I saw everything from amputees to, 80, 70, 80, 90% burn victims, like traumatic injuries. And most of them, you would go up to them and say, would you do this again? Like if you knew that this was the outcome of your service, of your sacrifice, would you do this again? And every single one of them would look you dead in the eyes and go, I would absolutely do this again. And my dad, his thing was always, he's an amputee now. And his thing was, I have 2 arms and a leg to give still. Or 2 arms, a leg, and a life to give still. I would do this again. I would go and do this and continue my job, because that's what's instilled in them. They don't necessarily want the Purple Heart. They don't want all of the medals and ribbons and everything that they can get to show their accomplishments, but they want the service. They want the sacrifice, and knowing that they are bringing freedom to people, and freedom to people that they will never even know.
Yeah, that's the big thing that my dad would come back and say, where there are certain things he didn't talk to us about, but the things he did talk to us about was, playing soccer with the kids, or being able to speak with these families that like directly helped them and translated for them. And he was like, a lot of these people, the experiences that they go through. And we have family from rural Mexico. And he's like, it's funny because the way that they have customs and traditions very much so reminded him of, my parents are first generation. So it reminded him of like ways that we grew up. And he's like, in that sense of community and everything like that. So he felt this also cultural sense of responsibility in a way to continue doing this. Cause he's like, I can't imagine if this wasn't here, but this was in my family's home country, how I would feel. Like, you want a sense of freedom for everybody. And he's like, and I get to go home at the end of the day if I'm blessed enough and sit there and be happy with my family and know that I'm in a place where I have all of these freedoms that are afforded to me, but I don't necessarily. Sorry, my little one is.
You're good. We become so grateful for the life we are able to live, in the United States. And I think it's being a military family, being a spouse, a child, a service member, you automatically become more grateful because you see these other countries and what they're going through, what they're suffering with. And you're like, okay, well, we don't have to deal with that at home. We don't have to. And you become so hyper aware of what little freedoms you have that you don't necessarily, you could kind of put blinders on, and you're like, okay, well, we do this way in the United States. They must do this all the this way in other countries. And it becomes hard to focus on those little things that, our families, our military families go through and why they go through it.
Yeah, it also, and you know what, going back to the conversation we had about traveling, I feel like when these military kids and these military families are able to travel, a lot of these kids develop a really great sense of diplomacy and representation because they become so much more aware of cultures and customs and even laws of different countries. Like when people go to Europe and they have to get their European driver's license and have to learn how to just follow those laws of that country, I feel like that's experiences that most people won't get to like be able to learn all these different customs and cultures and everything like that. And it makes you so much more aware too. So when you come back to the United States, my favorite thing is seeing people come back from overseas and immediately search up like a kebab spot, or they want to go to like a German place, or they want to go to somewhere that has great Italian food, or they'll be like, yeah, when I was in, I love hearing stories from overseas, or Korean barbecue always seems to be the thing that everyone argues the most about, at least at the installations I've been at, where someone is like, oh no, like it'll never compare to, and seeing this sense of camaraderie, like it is the military is such a big place, but so small at the same time that someone's gonna have been at somewhere you've been previously. Yeah. And there's like this sense of memory and this sense of camaraderie that it's just, I know people are like, oh, like it's just a job, or like, it's so weird how spouses get so involved in like their husband's job. Like you wouldn't do this if your husband was like a teacher or a nurse or a businessman, but it's like, it's so much more than that. It is literally a sense of community because you, like you stated, you move somewhere else that you don't know. There are people who might have had similar experiences to you at a previous place that you've both lived at. Yeah. Or I love invisible string when that happens, when there is someone who may have lived in another place at the same time as you, but like you guys never crossed paths, and now you're in this new place and you're just like, oh, I can't believe we're meeting for the first time. That's crazy.
Right. Yeah.
Or even that's branches.
Yeah. There's so many different, like that we always say the military is a small world, but then you start to get really into it. Okay. The Army is a small world. And then you get these specific MOSs and career field, and it just becomes smaller and smaller. And you end up reconnecting with so many of the same people that, you've been with, or you find those mutual connections, or those people that are, you've like, oh, I've been stationed with you before. Like I've crossed paths with you and I just never knew it. So it's definitely it's a really unique world. In so many different ways and so many different aspects. So there's no job in the civilian world that really relates to the military life and what we go through and how we adapt to it.
I honestly think the closest that I've found is at least with like the way my dad is still in government.
Yeah, there's a lot of government contracting positions, and there's a lot of government fields that are just, they have that high lifestyle. They have that high pace moving and deployments and everything. So that's like really the only thing that can relate to this. And that gets filled a lot by prior service members.
Right. That's where I was trying to go with that. A lot of the people there, they keep that tempo because whether it depends, like whatever branch they've been in, they could have been in the Marine Corps, they could have been in the Navy, they could have been in the Army, the Air Force, all of it. Like they're just so used to that sense of community. So they kind of tend to create it themselves. And it's so funny to watch. And they keep that, like those jokes and everything still going. Like my favorite thing is like when my dad, or when I get to meet his coworkers, and you can tell like who was in what branch.
Right.
There's like so many tells, and it's so fun. And the way they like are able to relate to each other. And so that's why I feel like I was like, that's literally the only thing I've really seen translate well. Obviously, there's still not that same stress aspect for some families or some spouses. I think maybe we didn't feel it so badly, like our family, because we're so used to the military lifestyle. So for us, it's like, oh, okay, like you're not leaving as frequently. Like you're just, it's a short trip. Like it's a business trip now.
Right.
Obviously, if somebody from the civilian world was coming into that government lifestyle, it would definitely be a culture shock. But the military to government, like work transition was just, it almost felt seamless for us. Like it was just like, okay, well, at least we get dad more frequently now. Like it wasn't something too crazy. And that's honestly like the only other avenue that we've really thought about, or that my husband's thought about, or even myself getting into government work, if we just decided to step away from the military lifestyle. But I don't know. Only time will tell what happens with that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But the last thing I do want to ask you is what is one piece of advice that you would give to a military child, a military spouse? You know, they can be separate, but a military child, military spouse, or a military family in general.
I would say to the kids specifically, and to parents of said kids, find a sport, a hobby, something that can travel with you hypothetically. For instance, Girl Scouts and Scouts are something that travels pretty easily with the military. And although it can be a little nerve-wracking because you're going from troop to troop, basically the curriculum and the outline of these programs stays about the same. So it is one sense of familiarity. Right. Also, if kids are attached to sports, usually CYS across all installations tends to have the same layout of sports, whether it be soccer or gymnastics or things of that sort. I definitely say, like, if your kid is just like, if they're like, I love an instrument, I love a hobby, I love a sport, definitely like just allow them to keep going for that. As for spouses, it's more so, it's always a hit or miss. Like, don't be afraid to go out in the community. It's gonna be awkward. I promise you, it's gonna be awkward from the beginning. But when you finally get out there, it's so rewarding. And we've been at JBLM for, I think it's going to be 5 years now. And I barely got out there 2 years ago. And it was a little confusing. It was a little nerve wracking. But when you find your people, it is so nice. And especially now with the new proposed model for PCSing, I feel like it'll make it a lot easier for families to find their space, even if it is for a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that, it's so important to really get involved in the community, no matter spouse, child, having those things that you can always turn to, almost comforting aspects. So I think that's great advice. And thank you so much, Sky, for being on the podcast and sharing, life as a military child and then, turning into a military spouse.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Gracie. And once again, congratulations on your commission and everything else. I can't wait to see all the amazing things that you accomplish.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Grace of a Military Child and Life podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to give it a like, follow, and comment. Also, be sure to check out Instagram and Facebook at Grace of a Military Child and Life for more awesome content. For information on the podcast, Military Child Bigs and Littles, GoAMCL blog, or other resources, visit www.goamcl.org. You can also email me at Gracie, that's GRACIE @GOAMCL.org with any questions or comments. To be a guest on the podcast, you can schedule it at www.goamcl.org/schedule a podcast, all one word, or contact me via social media or email. Stay tuned for the next episode where another incredible story is shared.